Yeah. Okay, so I think there's a conventional wisdom nowadays, which comes from Althusser, which suggests that the young Marx was more Hegelian and the older Marx of Capital broke with Hegel. And personally, I think that this is completely false, and no pun intended, it's exactly the opposite. If we read Marx himself and what he says about his relationship to Hegel, he's like, well, I criticized Hegel when I was younger because the young Hegelians, I was trying to break with them and, push things in this materialist direction. But now I'm upholding Hegel. There's a quote that Marx says, I think it is a lost quote that should have been in Capital Volume 3 or something along these lines, but someone tracked it down. My relationship with Hegel is very simple. I'm a disciple of Hegel, and the presumptuous chattering of the epigones who think they have buried this great thinker appear frankly ridiculous to me. So Marx really saw himself as a Hegelian, especially in his older years. Before writing Capital, he did a deep study of Hegel's logic, and you can see the categories there. Now, it's not like Capital maps onto the logic. Some people make this mistake of trying to think it does, and clearly doesn't. But if you read Marx and Engels and their correspondence, they're always talking about how new discoveries in science would have been really interesting. Like, they're like, oh man, I wish Hegel were alive to see Darwin or cell theory, right? Because he would have loved the dialectics of these things. But if we, the difference between Marx and Hegel's dialectic, if we really, what it really boils down to is I think really just the old wisdom that Hegel's an idealist, Marx is a materialist. And what does that look like? Well, so I think it's important to understand what idealism is, because we often use the term and it means different things. It means different things in philosophy and in politics and in Marxism. In the context of Hegel and the people around Hegel, idealism is the idea that philosophy can start with thought and that it can work out its problems in thought alone. And that's what Hegel does in the Logic. And that's what Hegel does when he gets to nature. He's like, I'm going to, look at science and all that, but I'm going to try to reconstruct rationally how the ideas fit together. It's how he approaches what do you call spirit, like anthropology, humans, and all of this stuff. And then, where it gets the most problematic is when we get to history. So for Hegel, we start with this idea of freedom, and we look at history and try to understand history as a kind of having this purpose of realizing freedom. And so we judge everything by how it lives up to that standard of the idea. Now, it's not everything just in our heads. There's a material aspect to it. At least there is for Hegel, where whether or not, so take something like the United States, right? So one could look at something like the Declaration of Independence and read, all people are created, all men are created equal, right? And then if one were to take a Hegelian standpoint, one would say, okay, well, has the United States realized this concept? And the answer would be no, right? Of course. Especially not when those words were written, and not so today either. And so from an idealist standpoint, you're saying, okay, the US has not measured up to its own concept. And you see the young Du Bois talk like this too, like young Du Bois, but early Du Bois is what I meant to say. Yeah, like, it's like, it's the United States is failing to live up to that standard of freedom. And Du Bois was really influenced by Hegel as well, especially during like Souls of Black Book and stuff like that. And so that is a very different way of viewing things as the progressive unfolding of freedom, even though one can say true things using that method, then the much more sophisticated Marxist analysis of we're starting with the economy. We're looking at things. We're not just looking at how they correspond to an idea. We're looking at where exploitation is, where the money is, right? Where the power is, who's benefiting from all of this. Now, it's important to notice that Hegel is like, in a way, like the best of the idealists. I think, like they can't get, Lukács has this idea, it's like the pinnacle of bourgeois philosophy is Hegel. And then after that, you either become a crazy Nietzschean or you become a Marxist. Like there's nowhere else to go, right? So there is a sense in which Hegel he doesn't think you can just talk the talk and not walk the walk. Like he's not a Democrat, he's not like, you can't just like symbolize things, or say that you're about certain things and not actually prove it through your actions. Because like one thing that Marx and Engels really do get from Hegel is this theory of action, of like the proof of your motive is your deed. The proof of your intentions is whether you carry them out, and that there's a kind of unity between the mind and reality through proving yourself through action. But as far as Hegel's history goes, this remains purely an idea of like we have a certain like idea of a people, or idea of a world, or an idea of freedom, an idea of an epoch. And we're looking at the contradictions at the ideological kind of conceptual level. And if we bring in material things, it's to judge whether or not those material things contradict that concept, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would say that the biggest thing about idealism is that it starts in human thinking and not in the material world.